Morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, How to Successfully Write Workers' Comp. My name is Anae Agostini. I'm CEO of CID Insurance Programs. Myself and Lexi Johnson, who's our work comp underwriter, new business work comp underwriter, we both will be instructing the webinar today. I also want to introduce Jacob Cole, who's our marketing specialist, and he takes care of everything behind the scenes, so this all goes seamlessly, runs seamlessly. So without further ado, let's talk about some logistics. As many of you are used to with webinars, we can't have everybody talking at once, so you will be muted, but of course be able to hear. But your voice is really important to us. We want to hear from you, so we're asking that you pose questions in the chat room at any time throughout the webinar, and we will stop and answer your questions. Also, we want your feedback, so we really appreciate it if you would take the short survey that will pop up after the webinar and tell us how we did, and if you have any suggestions, we're open to them. So what are we going to talk about today? Our objectives. Okay, well, one of the things is obviously timeliness with quoting is really important to you and to us relative to usually that's going to be a big part of what creates your success with binding policies. So we're going to talk about how to get a competitive quote fast. In addition, we really want you to understand the Workers Comp Acord App a little bit better because the information that we need, we want to go over that with you so that we're all on the same page. And so once you submit, we can quote and move that quote along fast. And also, let's talk about some best practice strategies for maintaining your renewals. So, we're going to talk about new business in the beginning here, but then renewals, you need to play both parts of both sides of the equation here, which is new business and renewals need to be equally paid attention to. So we'll talk about that. And then Lexi is going to talk towards the end about premium audits and cancellations and how to be savvy about those to help your insureds better understand what that process is. So without further ado, let's get started. Well, first of all, this is a very, very general list of product appetite that we have that Lexi can write for you. So I wanted to at least put that out there. This list is by no means a list of everything that we can write. So Lexi has a much more comprehensive list that she can send out. In fact, Jacob will probably send that out to you at the end of this webinar, along with a few other items. But just to give you an idea of the kinds of things that we're writing in workers' comp. Also, you've got our team and Lexi heading up the team. Okay. Take it away, Lexi.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. So, new business quotes, how to get a quote fast. These are below points that are 5 basic pieces of information of how we effectively underwrite and quote the risk for you, and is also what is just needed to start quoting the process. So I'll dive into each point, but I first just want to mention whenever you're trying to quote an account with an insured, you need to know exactly what you're submitting. And what I mean by that is it is really important to have a good understanding of the business. What are their operations? What type of employees do they have? What are the duties of each employee? Do they have prior coverage? Do they even have experience in the industry? And the list can go on. But it is so important to ask a lot of questions up front because in time, we may turn around and ask those questions, or the carrier is going to turn around and ask those questions. So it's better just to save time and ask ahead. So the 5 basic points of information, these are included on the Accord 130 application that we actually require to quote the risk. And I'll go into that a little bit in more detail later. But The first point, entity name and insured contact information. So I do need to know the name insured and also what type of entity they are. So whether they're a corporation, a LLC, or a partnership. And then just a side note, the name insured and the entity should match how they're actually filed with the state. So sometimes I receive an Accord 130 application, and they may be checked as an individual on the Accord app, but then I come to find out they're actually filed with the state under a corporation. So just to avoid repetitive work on the account, make sure to include exactly how they're filed with the state so that we can just have the correct information up front. And also, most of the time this is overlooked, but I do actually need the insured contact information. That includes the first and last name of the insured, the phone number, and also the email address. It's just because nowadays everything is becoming electronic instead of going through the physical mail. So the carriers are requesting this information to be on file when you are quoting the risk. And then the second point is the FEIN number. So this is a federal employer identification number. This is actually how all our carriers track their submissions. So this is how we can tell if a market is blocked already or submitted by another agent. And then something to just keep in mind, we do receive submissions where their actual social security number is listed. But I just want to be clear that the FEIN number is different. This is something that the IRS assigns the FEIN number to businesses for tax filing or reporting purposes. So when the insured sends in all their audit documentation at the end of the policy term, it can cause a discrepancy if it's different. So always present the FEIN number and not their actual social security number. And then the third point is detailed description of business operations. So this connects with what I was mentioning earlier, but you have to know what it is the business or what are the services being offered. Again, make sure just to have a clear description of what the employees are doing, ask your insured questions about the risk. A quick example, actually, I have received Accord apps in the past that just say contractor under the description, but I need to know actual details, like are they general contractor, are they artisan, what type of work are they performing, is it painting or is it electric? And this also ties into the payroll classification because you want to properly classify the employees and you don't want to overcharge them by placing an employee in a wrong classification. Okay, and then the fourth point, payroll classification. So this is basically just how are the employees being classified. Here you would list the number of full-time versus part-time employees, and then you'd also provide their estimated annual payroll per class code. And there could be multiple classifications. So if you have questions on classifications, you can always reach out to me. But also a really good source for trying to figure out how to classify an employee is the Work Comp Rating Bureau. You can search your duties and actually see what class description fits them best. And then current value loss history. So if they have prior coverage, I do need current value loss history. We basically just need to know their claims history or if they've had 0 claims. And then last, supplemental application. So this could be requested. I put depending on the size because it does depend on the operations. Most of the time they will require this on larger risks over, I would say like 10,000 in premium, but we do have supplemental applications online on our website, which is CIDinsurance.com. So you can always complete it and then send it in with your Accord 130. And then just to mention too, if it is a higher exposure or let's say multiple operations they're performing, I would just recommend filling one out because most of the time it'll be requested anyways. And then lastly, it is very helpful if you're able to provide a target premium. So basically that's just so I know what to aim for to secure the bind. Our goal is ultimately to get you the best pricing. So if you can provide as much information as possible, it would be really useful. And then moving on to the Accord 130. Okay, so this is a standard Accord 130 application, and I made up this business. There's just one that I created, but I wanted to show you key factors I need completed on the Accord 130 to quote. And then one quick note, please make sure when you're actually filling out the Accord 130 that it is legible. I recommend just like filling in a fillable Accord 130, and I can send that over to you as well if you don't have one. But basically everything that is highlighted is information I need completed to quote. So the name insured, as we discussed earlier, in this case, I made it just a sole proprietor. So I included the DBA of the business, and I often see the DBA missing on many applications, so just make sure to include that information. And then the mailing and physical location, and again, the FEIN number. Also the effective date. So if the insured does not have prior coverage, if they're just a new venture, I recommend putting a future effective date. Sometimes when I receive an application, the effective date is actually that day. But then when we continue to work the account, we have to continue to refresh the quote and update the effective date. So it's just easier to start with a future effective date, and we can always go back and bind. And then moving on, yeah, perfect. So as I mentioned earlier, the full name of the contact information. So first, last name, phone number, and then email must be listed. Also make sure to include ownership information and the percentage of ownership. It should add up to 100%. Sometimes I get submissions where it adds up to like 120 or 130. So just make sure it adds up to 100 and the ownership is correct. And then this is also important because I need to know which exclusion form to send over to you that the insurer needs to complete prior to binding coverage, just to make sure they're properly excluded once we bind. And then lastly on this one, the rating information. So if they have multiple locations, you want to make sure that you include payroll and employee count for all locations and break it up, and don't lump it all into just one class code and one payroll. Because on the policy, it will be divided, and also you want to just make sure all those locations are added. So make sure to divide the payroll per location, and then you'll also want to include the classification, the duties of the employees, what they're performing, and then make sure to put the number of full-time versus part-time, and then lastly, their estimated annual payroll. And then we can't input cents in payroll, so just make sure you round up. And then the last part, okay. So make sure to include the prior carrier information if they do have prior coverage. Here's also a great place to put the annual premium, so I know the target premium we need to get under to bind coverage. So here you can see they're with AmTrust, and their annual premium was $8,547. So I'm going to try to get underneath that number. And also the description of operations. Here it is brief, just because it doesn't include a lot of exposure, but just make sure to include information that would be useful for me to underwrite. So for example, the years of experience. Some carriers do offer credits depending on the years in business, so that's something good to point. And then the loss information and ultimately just what they are. And then, so everything that was highlighted is what I ultimately need to quote coverage. And if I receive an Accord 130 like this, then I normally can have a quote back to you that same day. So now we will go into the renewal process.
Yes, and I'm going to talk about the renewal process. Good information, Lexi. Thank you. So, as I was saying at the beginning of the webinar, it's really important. It's so easy to get bogged down by the service issues related to your agency or your position to manage the day-to-day, service issues. You always, as Lexi's talking about, new business is very important, and managing your renewals as equally important. So let's talk about that. We use a system in our own office. It's called 60-30-10 renewal process, and we start our renewal 60 days prior to the expiration date. You can see that what we do for you is what we recommend that you do with your insureds as well. So we send out a renewal request. So at 60 days, we may be asking, especially with workers' comp, we'll be asking for updated information on the insured, payroll or change in ownership, locations added, that kind of thing, new information, because all that affects the renewal policy, and your information needs to be accurate. And what in case there is a claim or something where the information, like the location, wasn't on the policy. So we start at 60 days to gather that information. At 30 days, our plan is to send out a renewal quote to you so that you can do a professional proposal to your client. And that's our process. At 10 days, we're going to send a reminder notice, really, which is just hey, we sent you this proposal. We want to make sure that we're going to bind that renewal. And one of the ways to handle a renewal process, and this is, in my book, is one of the most important things, is having a renewal report to monitor your retention ratio is really important. And it's not only your retention ratio, but managing your renewals. And I'm going to show you a sample of one on the next screen, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But this is your ability to find out, what's my retention? How am I retaining all my renewals? Am I retaining 90% of my renewals, 95%, or am I losing renewals and I'm not even aware of it? So and that's a simple equation to be able to determine. And you usually do it not by PIF or policy in force, but you do it by premium to see how much premium you're retaining. Also, you want to track your renewals because you need to know whether the policy, you want to know that the policy's been issued and that you've been paid your commissions. And that once you've done that completes the process for each policy, because you got the policy. And chances are, if you got a policy issued, it should go into the billing cycle and automatically would pay your commissions on a direct bill basis. A little bit different if you're talking about agency bill, but we don't deal in agency bill on workers' comp, so it's much easier. It's all direct bill. You just confirm that your commission is paid, and you can do that all on the same renewal expiration list. And then last, make that formal presentation to the insured. We have some templates on our website that really make it easy for you to make sure that you do not want to send what we send to you. We want you to send a formal presentation to your insured because commercial insurance deserves that, because it's very little labor involved with workers' comp policies throughout the year. So it's really important that you touch that insured professionally once a year at that renewal, and they know that you're there to take care of them. So here's an example of the expiration report. Now, some of you maybe have an agency management system that you use. If you're an independent, some of you may, or some of you may not. But and then if you're a farmer's agent, Farmers takes care of all of that for you. But if you have an outside book, you certainly need some way to manage your renewals. So we have a template on our website that's designed, and you're looking at it here. You can see at the bottom it goes all the way through the year. We recommend managing your renewals by month. We recommend managing new business production by week, because you need to know if you're falling behind. But renewals, you want to be able to look at the whole month and work that month, and you're working and work it have it sorted by expiration date. That's going to be the most important, because you're tracking every one of those renewals. Simultaneously, we're in the month of July right now, so someone working the renewals, say in our office, would be working on renewing, the July renewal policies. However, they might be still catching up on some from June that they haven't quite found out whether they've renewed or not. and they're working forward, so they're already working August and looking at September. So you could easily have 4 months going on at one time because it's an ongoing process. So this is a great tool for those of you that might need to create an expiration list by month. Please visit our website, and it's in the Jacob, where is it on our website?
It's in the templates section under Broker Tools.
Perfect. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm going to turn it back over to Lexi.
Okay, so premium audits, this can be one of the more frustrating things, but it is important for you and your insured to know that all work comp policies are subject to a premium audit. There are no exceptions. So that is mandated by the state, that they come back around to determine if the payrolls were accurate. So ultimately, the accurate premium was charged for the exposure. So the carriers will do this at least annually. And most of the smaller policies are going to be voluntary audits, and that's when an actual physical form will be sent from the carrier, and then this must be completed by the insured and sent back. So you always want to make sure to inform your insured in advance that this form will be coming either in the mail, or as I mentioned nowadays, most of it is actually through email. So it might come through the mail, it could come through email depending how they sign up. But you want to make sure you inform them so that they can look for it and they'll fill it out and they don't get marked as non-compliant. A lot of companies are now offering to complete the final audit online, as I mentioned, so it's about a 20-minute process, and it just makes it very convenient. They can just upload everything at that time, and then an auditor will contact them. So, and then there could be a physical audit, which is more for the larger risks. Well, to have someone come into the office of the company and go into the accounting department and actually physically audit their book. So those are those two options. And then just some advice, these auditors, they are looking for any uninsured or unlicensed vendor that actually could be deemed as an employee if they're injured. So if they can't prove that they have a license or own insurance to cover, or their own insurance to cover the exposure for the injury, then the carrier will most likely consider them as an employee. So they can either be an independent contractor with proof, or they would be deemed as an employee. And then what happens from there is their payroll or whatever you paid that vendor would be included in the audit, and then you'd be paying premium on that. And then moving on to the importance of completing the audit. So these are just some problems with audits, something to be aware of that we've seen. It is essential that insured complies with their audit report to avoid that non-compliance. And non-compliance, it can result in 3 issues. So number 1, an estimated audit will be issued, charging a large amount of additional premium. Secondly, they could receive a cancellation notice that's issued on their current active policy. And then lastly, if the audit goes months being non-compliant, then at that point an outside collection agency would step in. So also just keep in mind, if the insured does receive an estimated audit, once the insured completes the audit report, because they can go back and complete it to comply, the estimated audit will be revised. So that's always an option too. I just want to mention too, if an audit comes back and the payroll is higher, maybe the company grew throughout the year, a payment plan can be negotiated with the carrier. But if the current policy goes into cancellation due to that additional premium never being paid, then at that point, it's off the table. You wouldn't be able to set up the payment plan. So you always want to make sure you're fast and communicate with us on the situation so that we can also turn around and communicate to the carrier to get them set up on the best plan. So basically, moral of the story, just make sure the insured complies with all documentation requests. Be very proactive with the insured when we forward those audit compliance reminders.
Lexi, I have a question for you. I think sometimes there's a confusion about the amount of information, like the information that the insured needs to provide the auditor or the audit department, and then there is a second part of it, which I heard you mention, but I do think that sometimes, you know, everyone forgets that part, and that's where the non-compliance can easily come into play, is that they may have provided the information, but they never respond to the auditor who will need to speak to them, interview them, correct?
That's correct. So if they fill out that, let's say that online audit, and they provide maybe a couple payroll documents, but let's say they're missing information still, just because they submitted that information, an auditor will still try to reach out to them, and they have to comply with that interview or also comply with any additional documents the auditor is asking for, or they're still going to be deemed as non-compliant, and they're still going to get that estimated annual premium on their audit.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So cancellations. Of course, none of us want a policy to cancel, so hopefully we can always work together to prevent a cancellation from happening, but as you know, they do happen. The carrier will send out cancellations for the following reasons. One could be non-payment, non-reporting on an audit, as I mentioned, or just a simple material change. So non-payment cancellations are pretty self-explanatory. If the insured does not make payment on their policy or they're past due on an installment, they're going to receive this notice in the mail. And then non-reporting, it links together with what I was mentioning earlier, but if the insured's non-compliant on their audit, then a cancellation will be issued on their current policy. So non-reporting cancellations, they are very important to pay close attention to because most carriers will not reinstate the policy if the cancellation date passes. So if the insured is a little bit behind and they end up reporting after the cancellation date passes, they'll complete their audit, but they won't reinstate their current policy. So that's just one to make sure you're aware of. And then the material change, this would happen in the case, for example, if a policy was written for a landscaper who only does general landscaping, but then the carrier discovers there's tree trimming, well, that's a huge exposure. So the carrier at that point would send out a cancellation notice, giving them 30 days. And then the insured does receive a cancellation notice directly from the carrier, but we also send the broker that same cancellation notice, notifying them. So please be very proactive in making that payment or contacting your insured to send in that audit information before the date passes so we can try to avoid any cancellations. And we do recommend creating a cancellation process and a follow-up system so the cancellations are managed properly by someone. That's actually what we have in our office as well. And then concerning COVID-19, in regards to non-payment and non-reporting cancellations. So as I'm sure you're already aware, the California Department of Insurance in March, they requested all insurance companies to provide their policyholders a grace period to pay their premium. So at that point, all work comp carriers that we do business with, they did offer immediate relief by placing a moratorium on all billing and non-compliant audit cancellations. However, this is to inform you, if you don't already know, that all carriers have lifted that pause, that moratorium on not canceling policies for non-payment or audit non-report last month in June. So all payments and audits are due. But the carriers are taking a very proactive approach to review the billing status and to resolve any past due balances with the insured. And they're still offering additional consideration, such as like same-day payroll updates to reflect changes, which is an easy and effective way of providing cash flow relief. So we do encourage your insured to reach out to the carrier directly if they do owe a past due balance and they need assistance with figuring out a plan. Also, the insured does have the option, as I mentioned, of lowering their payroll if they let some employees go or the work has been slow. So we do recommend this option as well. Okay, so lastly, what do we write? And they went over a brief targeted classification codes that we write, but this is kind of a more, we have a wide appetite of what we can write with the carriers we work with, and we do work with some of the top work comp carriers in the industry, holding great relationships with our underwriters, so this definitely helps on the renewal and the new business side. So what you see here is just actually our top products we write. We do write many others, but just to name a few, we write restaurants, automotive, HOA, convenience stores, your medical and dental offices, your artisan contractors, and that would be like plumbing, electrical, painting. So we write all these frequently. Depending on the risk, we normally can get an automatic quote from the carrier, or it may take a day, but we're pretty quick on those. And then we do welcome new ventures. So we don't shy away from new ventures. We do a lot of new ventures from wholesale manufacturing, retail stores, artisan contractors. We may have limitations of what carriers that we can go to, but a lot of them are actually more open and comfortable with writing them, so we can get a quote. We also write lapse of coverage, which is something I wanted to mention. Normally it has to be within 30 days of the cancellation date. And I know occasionally you may run into one or two of these, so just make sure to provide the reasoning on the Accord application, maybe a short explanation of what happened to the company or why there is a lapse in coverage. That could be very useful for when I underwrite it. And then we do have markets for higher experience modifications as well. So when in doubt, you can always send me over a submission and I can review it quickly and let you know if we have a market that will entertain it.
Good information, Lexi.
Mm-hmm.
So that concludes our webinar today. We thank you guys so much for joining us. And again, please take the survey so that we can make sure that we're doing the best job we can for you. And then we've got lots of webinars still coming up for this year, and we have recorded webinars already on our website, so you can go watch webinars to your heart's content at any time that's convenient for you. And again, Lexi, make sure you reach out to Lexi with any questions that you have and start submitting those work comp applications today. Okay, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.